back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about understanding foreign currency exchange markets. So somehow I've been running this channel for over a year now. I've got 50 some videos, and we've never actually talked about what foreign currency exchange is precisely. And I know that this is going to be repeat knowledge or something that a lot of you already understand, but I thought I would just take a second to really dive into a little bit like what we're doing here, why we trade currency, how the markets potentially work. I'm not an economics professor or anything, so I'll just explain it to you the way that I understand it. So let's start with a very simple and basic idea of exchanging currency. So, for example, the currency that is used in the US is the US dollar. And I could take my US dollars, say I have 10 US dollars, and I could get on a flight and go to Japan. But in Japan, I would need the yen. And so I might get off of my flight and go to the kiosk in the airport or a bank somewhere in the city and say, I would like to exchange my 10 US dollars for yen. And let's just say to keep the math simple, they give me 100 yen as in exchange for my 10 US dollars. I don't think that's anything close to what the actual exchange rate actually is. Now let's just say to kind of make this a good thought experiment that I then actually don't spend any of my yen. Maybe I'm just using my debit card the whole time and I don't actually use any of that cash. I have 100 yen in my pocket and I go back to the airport, let's say 2 weeks later after my trip is over, and I hand them my 100 yen, and let's say that the exchange rate has changed, as they tend to do, and maybe I get $11 back or $12 back. Well, I've essentially just made $1 to $2, and I didn't actually do anything except hold a currency for a little while. And that's really the basics of what currency trading is just holding on to something and speculating that the value is going to change or that the exchange rate is going to change. So something I want to talk about a little bit today is an issue that I never really hear anyone discuss, and that is, why does this exist in the first place? Why can you trade currency? Why do we even have currency? And why does that rate between two currencies shift? Why can I get more of one currency or less of one currency depending on where I go and when I go there to actually make the exchange? Even though this is what makes foreign currency exchange possible, we all kind of just take for granted that it exists, and a lot of times we don't take the time to kind of think about like what really explains the system. So there's a great book on basically money called Debt by a guy named, I think, David Graeber. I think I got his name right. And basically a huge part of this book is about basically explaining why currency came to exist in the first place. So I want to talk a little bit about that now. So a very long time ago, it's sort of assumed that people exchanged value with each other with a bartering system. In other words, maybe I'm like a chicken farmer and I have a friend who is a blacksmith, and so I would say, hey, Steve, I need a hammer, I'll give you 10 chickens. It turns out this never really happened in all of human history, because if you think about it, it's immensely impractical. What if my friend Steve, who makes hammers and swords, doesn't need any chickens? Well, then now I have to go find someone who needs chickens. Maybe I can get something that he needs. And the practicality of trading like that to try and get what you need in society doesn't really make any sense. And so it didn't really happen that way. What happened instead is people would basically work with each other based on credit. So you would say, okay, I need a hammer. He would say, no problem. And he'd write down in a book somewhere, I gave John a hammer. And then maybe 3 or 4 months later, Steve might come to me and say, hey, remember that hammer that I gave you? Well, I could use a couple of chickens. Maybe you could help me out. And then I would go and do that. And so the entire economic systems of villages and sometimes even larger societies would function more or less based on credit. But that sort of asks a fundamental question, like, what is it that we're actually trading then? What is currency, right? In the beginning, it was sort of social credit, but what is it now? Because we don't have these specific relationships with everyone, right? We just have a relationship with the currency, and we assume that wherever we go, our currency will be accepted, and if we travel to a new country, we can trade that currency for the local currency, and it will help us buy things. Well, what the whole system comes down to, in fact, in my opinion, is trust. And so just like when we were dealing with one other person where I needed a hammer and I had chickens, right? We trust each other that over time we'll be able to help each other and all our debts and credits will be equalized, right? But now that trust has been abstracted to a currency. And so what happens is the trust in that currency varies over time. If you watch any currency market, you'll watch the exchange rates vary sometimes drastically and sometimes very quickly. And in my opinion, the reason that that can happen is because the trust in that currency changes based on the demand for it, how banks are dealing with that currency, what the future outlook for the economy maybe looks like, all of these different factors, news events, things that basically change how much value we think we'll be able to get for that currency in the future. And that's fundamentally what foreign currency exchange markets do. And that's why you can trade them, and because they're moving and they're volatile and they're changing, you have the opportunity to make or lose a large amount of money while you trade them. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about today. Not really that complicated when you think about it, but I never bothered to actually unpack that story or sort of make sure that everyone understood how this works. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we will talk to you soon.